Welcome to Securing Tomorrow podcast. Today we're going to be talking about a lot of interesting topics from a cybersecurity perspective. I'm here with John from IBM and Michiel from Palo Alto Networks. Before I give them the opportunity to introduce themselves, just a very quick introductions to the topics that we're going through today. We're focusing a bit on industry trends. What are both of these gentlemen seeing in their respective areas, and how is that impacting businesses? We relate that to cost and how businesses are looking at investments and innovations and the balance between security investments and regular business investments as well. We'll have a bit around the partnership and collaboration between IBM and Palo Alto Networks, of course. And further along, we'll be discussing some of the key points that we should be bringing to the board of directors. And there might be a bit of a surprise for you in there as well. So stay tuned as we go through the podcast here. But as I said, I want to give the gentlemen an opportunity to introduce themselves. So if I start with you, John, please.
Thank you. So my name is John Hermans. I'm running the cybersecurity business of IBM in Northern Continental Eastern Europe. Previous life, I was for more than 20 years as a partner as one of the big four, after which I run the security function of an Indian GSI in Europe. So even though that the title is security of the future, I take a lot of lessons from security of the past. So I think, and what I would like to actually bring into this podcast is really about saying, okay, what's next? So how can we take advantage of the most fascinating time we're currently having in security? Digital transformation, agentic AI, cool platforms, moving away from paper-based consulting to something that's actually working.
Very nice. Thank you, John. Michiel.
Yeah,
please.
thank you, Jesper. So my name is Michiel Buurman. I am 10 years working for Palo Alto Networks, responsible for the Benelux. Really glad to be here to talk about some really relevant topics today, together with John from IBM. And I think Palo Alto Networks is very suited now to have these kind of conversations, because when I started, we were a firewall company. We did one product. And if you fast forward to today, we do so much more. And we become much more relevant for also board members from our companies, and to really have a business conversation around what security can bring. So I'm looking forward to unpack that today with both of you.
Fantastic. I'm Jesper Olsen, and this is Securing Tomorrow podcast. Let's dive into it. If we start out with industry trends, John.
At the moment, we are in the most fascinating time for cybersecurity. I think, and that's straight away linking into the whole trends. So cybersecurity is, as the Germans say, is an Chefsache, right? So it's on top of minds. But the most important thing, what we're currently doing, is we are applying digital transformation to cybersecurity. It's really about saying, okay, how can we run our cybersecurity function as a real business, which is not stopping in the innovation of the business, but actually helping a business to outperform.
So the shift from being, the reactive force, waiting for the alarm to punch, and then you run out and you do your stuff. And now we're moving into the business.
Absolutely. The shift from the department of saying no to actually saying yes, to actually enabling us to applying AI the large scale, right? And not only in the business the process itself, but also in the cybersecurity function itself.
Michiel, what do you see? Being from a global cybersecurity leader as Palo Alto Networks, what do you think about the industry trends?
Yeah, we see a couple of things, Jesper. I think for most, AI, of course, is talk of the town, right? We see it in several forms. And I think to the point of John, it reminds me a bit of the cloud adoption, where a lot of people would say, hey, we're blocking it. We're not giving people access. It's like the Department of No. And people went with their credit card to AWS. And it just went on, right? I think the biggest shift that I see with customers today is that they know that they want to enable it. But how do I do that in a safely manner? And how do I make sure that my data is not used for different purposes? And I had a customer conversation last week where they did an assessment, and they found out that they had 300 applications running with AI, whilst they haven't rolled it out yet. So whether you like it or not, this is the reality, right? And I think a lot of companies are struggling with that. The other thing, of course, is the whole ransomware evolution that's going on, right? Ransomware as a service. Also, AI plays a pivotal role in that as well. They can launch much more attacks than before. And we need to be every time right. And they only need to be one time right in order to make an impact. And the last piece I would say is that, of course, the growing attack surface is quite a big element. And we have, of course, now a very bad example, of course, with Jaguar Land Rover. That's in the media, where you have a business impact like that you can't produce cars for quite a severe period of time. That's a true business impact.
We are saying yes, apparently. We are doing a lot of things. Most of the time, hopefully, we know about it.
Yeah.
It depends, right?
It depends.
The security team might not always know about it, and that makes them very reactive as well. And I think that's one of the areas where we're also trying to, also through the partnership that we have together, Palo Alto Networks and IBM, is trying to help customers understand what is it exactly we're saying yes to, and how can we then move forward as well. Of course, the cost, I love to call it cost excellence rather than cost optimization and everything else, because it's more positive, right? But we move into the cost excellent piece of cybersecurity, being more the enabler and bringing more flexibility. And at the same time, understand exactly to your point, Michiel, as well, that the threat landscape is expanding. If it's not by the way we're consuming technology, it's by the way the technologies themselves evolve on the back end of it, and therefore also potentially impacting how we move and operate as well.
What we're seeing in practice that of course, while also the early adopters, they're all basically invested big time in solutions, in processes, probably done gold-plated on processes, not standardized. They now come to the realization saying, hey, wait a moment, if you take an example to basically a business process like HR in the past, right? We started to actually optimize that one. Why is it? Basically putting everything back in the first line of defense. So why should we do that? By using clever technologies, by integrating the processes. And I think that's the big wave what we're currently doing. I think also in cybersecurity, including, and if you're looking in the IT estate, everyone that was the last couple of years looking, how can I rationalize applications? How can I standardize my IT infrastructure? It's, of course, it's always a hybrid environment, but simplifying it. I think, and that's also when we're looking in the whole product stack of cybersecurity, we definitely move in that platformization space in which we can optimize costs. Not that from a technology stack point of view, but also from a process standpoint of view, and then applying then AI in the same stack. Yeah, of course, also would mean that we need probably some less effort and spend that effort of those brilliant people really on things that do matter.
I'm totally on board with what John is saying here. I think what we're seeing from a Palo Alto Networks standpoint is that we're driving towards an AI-driven economy.
Yeah.
So when you're doing that, you need an AI-driven security solution, right? And I think exactly the point that John is hitting home is that we see with so many customers that they have so many tools in place, where you can't really say that these are AI-driven, right? They used to be very well in their role maybe a couple of years back, but looking now at all the demands that the business have, are these tools still up for the task? Yeah. And that's, I think, the analysis that you need to make is like, do I really have the tools that will bring me for the coming 3 to 5 years to where I want to be as a business? Yeah. And that also ties back to the digital transformation. But I think that's where we see that AI-driven is now a prerequisite. It really is. And therefore, with platformization, we've seen, for example, with a customer in the Netherlands that they had 4 solutions for remote access. Yeah. That seems a bit too much. And then going back to the cost piece, that's a huge cost that you're having. And 4 platforms that you need to maintain, that you need to have knowledge about, you need to have trained people and so on and so forth. So we did there a consolidation towards one solution, and the benefits there are massive from an operational standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint. Yeah. And I think that's indeed the exercise that a lot of companies now are looking at, because we did an exercise together actually with IBM, and we see that there are over 80 security tools on average with an enterprise. So that's on security alone, let alone the total application landscape, right? So I think there's a lot to gain there in order to consolidate and indeed to platformize there to gain more benefits as a business.
Yeah, I fully agree, and very much aligned to that. A lot of the conversations I have with my peers as well is from a security controls perspective and the security policies perspective. One thing is having a well-written, well-defined policy acknowledged by the organizations. But then when you start moving into, I want to implement this in the technology and I want to enforce it across the entire estate, for instance, having 4 different technologies for your remote access and then trying to have a somewhat cohesive and coherent security policy applied across them, that requires the skills and everything. But there's also bound to be some gaps in there as well. And the other side, of course, is what if an incident occurs? Do you know which one to look at first? And, what's the order of prioritization here? What if the one that has experience on one platform is not at home or not available for the incident? All of those kind of areas ties into this as well, right? So it's almost like the old saying that complexity is the enemy of security, as well as efficiency, as well as good business, right? I like that point. You also mentioned AI a few times, Michiel.
And I think as well, it really is a board topic. So I had a conversation with a large insurance company where they spent 3 days with their management team offsite to determine for themselves first, so business leader, CEO and his management team, around what is AI? What can it mean for our organization? And how do we want to roll it out? And they basically defined a roadmap for themselves that in 3 years' time, they want to reduce 30% of their personnel and AI will take over these jobs. However, the people that they have, they want to give them different roles. And that's exactly what we see in cybersecurity as well, right? Because with AI, you can automate a lot of things that are now manually driven by a lot of people. So they can actually focus on what matters. And they have different roles. So it requires also from a skills kind of perspective, you need to train and level up your people in order to do more impactful work. So we need to make sure that AI is leveraged for layer 1, layer 2, and that we use our I would say, skilled resources
level 3
for more impactful work, like layer 3. So I think that's something that I've seen now with companies. And I think the more forward-leaning companies that have an AI strategy that also know what the business impact will be and what they want to do with the resources that they have, I think they will be the winning companies.
The interesting thing is you made the analogy to cloud, right? When we started with the cloud service and everyone was basically acquiring a cloud service and using a credit card. That's exactly what we're seeing with now the AI initiatives. I think we have many customers who probably have hundreds of initiatives, even they don't know about what it is, even though that a board is setting up a kind of an AI governance model. And a nice policy, right? But of course, a policy without the police is not working. So in that sense, I think I think that's also one of your products, but one of the newer concepts is really focus on how can I build capabilities which basically enforce certain guardrails for actually using AI in the right way. From a discovery point of view to measurement to basically to do risk mitigation to do the reporting. Currently a couple of projects we are doing, early days, but I think that's the whole next step. And the good thing is that whilst we probably learn from cloud and that kind of things, we're now putting up the capabilities which are not stopping innovation, which basically helping the organization saying, okay, in a kind of a way to actually enable them without saying no, to actually to take the maximum advantage of the innovation, what they're doing with AI.
So defining AI, what it means and what it is for the business, defining the right use case for AI,
the governance,
and moving forward on it, defining the governance, understanding the skills that you have to have in place, where do you need to focus? And then, of course, also back to both of your earlier points is making sure that once you start on that journey, you already started, but once you continue on that journey, let's call it that, you also have the right security stack in place. What I typically tell organizations as well when I sit with the executive teams is, well, look at it this way. If you haven't changed anything in your security stack in the past 5 years, then how do you know that they're going to cope with the technology that has evolved and appeared in the past 5 years? Right. Similar again to the cloud analogy. At the time, there was no security team that had tool stacks that could look at the cloud security. They had to use the individual cloud service providers' interfaces, and they chose whatever they wanted to show you. And you then had to choose whether or not that was enough for you at the time. Right. And like we always say, it's about visibility and actionability on top of that visibility, right? It's nice to know what's going on, but it's even nicer to be able to do something about what you know in there, right? So what do you think organizations should be focused on? If you look forward, let's say 12 to 18 months, knowing all that we've been talking about now, Can we give them a sort of a clear guidance? What should organizations be looking at?
Let's start one. Fix the basics.
There you go.
Fix the basics means, of course, know what you are protecting. Right? That's, I think, the very important thing there. Be resilient means basically to be able to detect and respond in minutes and seconds instead of days and months. And then, of course, by doing that, because that's your core function in cybersecurity anyhow, then enable all those innovations by basically applying a kind of integrated TAN framework. Don't overcomplicate, right? But also apply clever technologies which are enabling these kind of new processes and projects.
Very good. Michiel, any points on that?
Well, you can't protect what you can't see. So it starts with visibility, absolutely, right? And I think there's still a lot to gain in order to set this up. So visibility is key, I think, especially with all the things that are happening now. The other element that I would say is also, of course, important is the whole trend towards agentic AI, right? Yeah. Which then, and of course, we have a pending acquisition with regards to identity, but then identity plays a role, right? We see now that the machine-to-human ratio is 80-1. Yeah. So that means that we need to have an answer to that, right? And I think that we have all heard and seen all these great AI deepfakes, all those kind of elements. That is becoming real. Yeah. And that's also something that we need to take into account. So we made, as Palo Alto Networks, we made some predictions for 2026, and we call it the year of the defender. And one of those is that, especially with all these trends around the autonomous AI agent, you want to make sure that they make the right decisions, right? Yeah. And I think data then really comes into play as well. How can we make sure that there is no data poisoning? How do we make sure that the data actually is correct? Yeah. So there's a lot of things that we need to take into account here. And that's why I think visibility is key in order to understand that. I think the business impact analysis that you need to do across the board from an executive level is imperative here as well.
So agentic is coming for sure. Everybody is moving into that phase. Yeah. So if we're not platforming, if we're not doing platformization within the security stack, we have our 40, 50, 80 security tools in an enterprise. Imagine what happens when you put agentic on top. And I hear some of the arguments, by the way, from some of the organizations that are using 40, 50 tools, right? It's, we want to avoid the vendor lock-in and everything. And I had that conversation a few times. Now I put in a layer of agentic AI that becomes dependent on the tool layer beneath it. And we'll use these different tools to create the business outcome, right? That actually means that you move from thinking about vendor lock-in towards 1 or 2 or 7 vendors. You now have 40, 50 or 80 vendor lock-ins because that agentic layer is now dependent on the individual tools that you built the integrations for. Imagine what happens if one of those tools fails. So we've had a great conversation already, but I feel like we were touching on some areas of great interest to the audience, and a lot of the conversations that we are having with customers as well and our partners around investments and that whole balance sheet. You know, the businesses and the organizations out there, they need to find a balance in their traditional investment and then the security. And John, you had a very good point on that. Could you elaborate a bit?
So what I'm seeing in the market is, at the moment, all security budgets are, in the most positive way, staying flat. Mm-hmm. And that means basically, of course, we need to start subsidizing the security needs in these strategic initiatives from that current budget. Yeah, that's the task that a CISO is having. And how do you do that? That's basically looking and saying, okay, how can I save costs in basically running my shop? And how can I create a budget for creating new capabilities to actually ensure that all the new initiatives can apply the principle of secure by design? I think that's the biggest question now to every CISO. The business recognizes that they cannot do without security. Let's also be very honest, especially in this region, right? We trained all boards on the importance of cybersecurity and that kind of things. So they are aware. They are aware also about what the impact of AI is, but also what the risk is of using AI in the wrong way, or if you don't have the guardrails to actually protect your AI environment. So in that sense, this is a fantastic opportunity for every CISO to actually take that additional the budget, which he's freeing up by basically the standards and rationalization of the whole security stack by optimization his own security function, and to bring that as almost like as an investment and taking also a seat at the table of all those very strategic initiatives.
Yeah, so it's more than just an IT project, is that?
Absolutely, absolutely. Hopefully it is.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think then get back to the drawing board, right?
Michiel, yeah, your point?
Yeah, I think John is spot on, right? I think that this really is a board level again. This is a business decision. Yeah. This is not an IT decision. This is a business decision. We have many conversations with companies where they're looking at how AI will disrupt their go-to-market models. Yeah. There are certain industries that come to mind, and they are fully aware of that. They need to have a strategy around that. And with that strategy comes strategic initiatives. And there, to John's point, security is embedded, right? Yeah. We cannot have these initiatives without security. That's a non-starter. It should not be on the table. And therefore, I think from a CIO standpoint or a CISO standpoint, we see now more and more, of course, that they need to report into the board. So yeah, I think it's a very exciting time, and that's also where IBM and Palo Alto Networks can help in different shapes and forms, of course, where the company is heading towards. But I think those are really interesting business conversations to have.
I really like the aspect of, the security budget as a bucket for security might not change that much, but because security becomes more and more integrated into business initiatives, so does the budgeting. And that sort of, that allows growth and expansion from a security efficiency perspective.
The interesting thing is what we're doing now is we're getting much more to the data-driven aspect.
Yeah.
To be very honest, I don't think that any company is interested in any certified auditor saying that you're on CMM level 3.0, then based on the professional judgment, right? So I think it's really now about, okay, how can we apply data-driven then concepts basically to actually almost have a real-time CISO dashboard, right? Yeah. Just like a CFO is having on his financials, right? Yeah. That's, I think, and then that's all about exposure to management. That's all about checking down your controls. That's all about knowing what's happening on your network. That's all about what kind of risk then do I take and which kind of initiatives, all the different things. Yeah. So I think that's still my holy grail where I'm thinking of we should be having a very dynamic CISO then dashboard, which should be integrated in that board then dashboard to actually measure the effectiveness of security in a business way, right? And I think that's where we're moving to. And also AI is playing a very important role in that one, right? So one of the initiatives we are doing at IBM is also saying, hey, how can we apply AI to consolidate all those security frameworks into policies? How can we measure that and that kind of things? So the next step of GRC, right? Yeah. I think that's where where we also then are working together, saying, okay, we know that we have a fantastic security stack. We have some great ideas. We know that we have some concepts which you can improve, which you can move to a kind of a data-driven, AI-enabled environment. How can we actually to make that happen? So we jointly develop some assets, or basically also part of your product stack, but also in all the different ways, saying, okay, how can we improve on the effectiveness of security? Yeah. And also, again, back to the accountability of security, and also about do we really see what is security bringing us, right? Mm.
Yeah, and also here, I think to add what John is saying, because I couldn't agree more, is that platformization also means that you want to have, to your point, all the telemetry from all the elements into one data lake, right? Yeah, from the network, from the edge, from the cloud, from identity. You want to have it in one data lake, because then you have one holistic overview instead of having all these several point of views. Yeah. And I like the analogy towards the CFO dashboard. You want to have one data lake where you have the intelligence, where you have that holistic overview with regards to security. Yeah. And that's something that we together can provide towards companies. And that gains so much more, again, visibility, but also really actionable items as well on your fingertips, right? And that's something that we see with customers, I would say, a lot, that there is a need for that. And also there's a business need for that, because they get those questions. And we rolled out, for example, Gen AI in our Strata platform, which is our next network security platform, where you can just ask, like, am I protected against XYZ? And you get an answer, and you get these kind of things. Because reporting and documentation, of course, it's not the most sexy part of our business, but it is needed.
Yeah.
And especially when you talk about audit, compliance, you talk about DORA, NIS2, what have you, documentation is a very critical element. And I think there also to let AI work for you in that sense, to have that information for you, saves so much time, but it needs to be real time. And Absolutely. It needs to be like, one holistic overview rather than having all these fragmented views of only your network or only your edge or only your cloud. You need to have one holistic overview. And I think that's where platformization can be really tangible for business.
Yeah.
So that they can see the difference in, the actionable items with that overview compared to having now multiple panes of glass that gives you only a fragment of that kind of intelligence that you have within your organization.
It's so interesting. If you're leaning back, let's see what we are doing. Right, we are decreasing now complexity. Right, we are basically saying, guys, this less security capabilities which are not then integrated. Right, so we start doing a rationalization of that one. Right, we use more data. We use models which are working. Basically, we bring all the elements now together that you actually can move to that data-driven environment, in which you almost can, on all levels, on the strategic level, have a dynamic dashboard for your CFO, for your board, which is not built on PowerPoint and that kind of things, and not probably using something else, right? Which is really actual, factual, without any interpretation of a human being, right? On a tactical level, you have all the components that are now in place. So I think, as I mentioned also in the starting point, I think we are at a very interesting turning point in the industry, right? Yeah. Actually running this as a business, right? Instead of like 30 years ago, we were the geeks sitting in that basement doing pen testing, right?
It's from reactive to proactive, right? Yeah. That's what you really see now. And then I think that's a very interesting space.
What you can get when you bring things together is you get data and context, and that leaves you in the information space. Now you have something you can prioritize. And when you have information, you add meaning to it. Now you start moving into the knowledge domain. And with knowledge, you can actually take decisions, right? And exactly to your point, Michiel, that being proactive means that you understand exactly where you are right now in real time. That also gives you the flexibility to the business as well, right? Because that actually allows you to take on more risk. You can see, well, we have the right policies in place. They're being enforced. We can report on them as well where need be. So if you make a slight change over in the innovation team, or if you want to try something out, we can see in real time the impact of this. We can safeguard our most critical assets and services. And that actually brings even more value to the business. So almost coming, full circle around the whole cost excellence thing and thinking about how do we bring, better balance between the traditional investments and the security investments. Well, if you do have that security investment in place, that gives you that real-time view from a data-driven decision-making point of view, you actually get more value out of your other investments as well. It sounds like a good partnership between IBM and Palo Alto Networks going out here.
Absolutely it is.
When we look at risk management, resilience in general, you mentioned that earlier as well, fix the basics, think and do resilience. We talked a lot about, the different areas of cybersecurity fit in the business and what it can offer. But what does it look like, cyber resilience? What is good resilience to you, John? What would you say?
But basically, moving away from the detect and the response in hours, from in weeks and months to actually seconds and months, right?
Yeah.
I think if that's your strategy, then on the resilience, I think then you know that you need to do a lot. And so where does it start? I think where does it start is also look at your whole governance. Step one, right? If your IT the governance is not stable or it's not fixed, right? It's not going to work.
Yeah.
So I was involved in a couple of large-scale incidents where basically the company, the global company, built up of many acquisitions, where basically the local IT guy somewhere in the country could deinstall certain security tools because then a laptop was a little bit faster, right? If you're allowing that one, then you are sitting duck, and basically it's also saying your IT governance is not working. Yeah. So it all starts there. We consultants always said, focus on things that do matter. Focus on your crown and jewels. That's right, but that's only possible if you have a way to actually do a certain form of segmentation. Otherwise, it's not working. You cannot protect everything, right? So that means that you need to basically know what is your estate, right? And where are your crown jewels, and how can I put some additional controls around that one?
Yeah.
And segmentation or micro-segmentation in the new world is basically that next step. Then it's back to the visibility part, right? You need to have a modern SOC, and a modern SOC means you have to have an eyes and ears in the infrastructure. You need to apply clever DAM processes. You need to do a very fast triage if something is happening, all the different things there. And the other part is you need to exercise. You need to exercise because things do go wrong. That's not only your organization, but also with your IT suppliers, with everyone. You need to do the exercises if something is going wrong. How fast will we be back in business? Mm-hmm. So I think that's probably the 3-4 things that are on top of my mind if I'm talking about resilience.
Michiel, any comments on?
Yeah, I think really great points by John. I think I would add to that. I think we didn't really discuss around the user experience, right? So I think the user and to take the user on that journey with regards to security is a very important element, of course. I'm not even talking about insider threats, but I'm more talking here about regular phishing, like we have it in Palo Alto Networks, where we test a lot of our employees around that, and like you should too, right? Because we still see that this is an element of risk. So that is very important to keep doing. And in that regard, I would say, for example, red teaming with AI, the tooling is there in order to continuously test your environment. And like Zero Trust has a definition where you say assume breach, and then make sure that you have your resilience around that. I think when you have things like that in place, you already have a good start. And make sure that you test this all the time. And with resilience, it also comes back to the point that John made, is like, how many times have you actually done those exercises? Because it's great to have it on paper. Yeah. But how does it work in reality?
We have something called the cyber range, and I know that many organizations have those cyber ranges in their own organizations. But doing that, right, getting everyone involved who should be playing a role if there's a large-scale incident in that setting, exercising, also doing that after there are some major changes in the organization and that kind of things. I think that's really essential. And by the way, it's also fun to do, right? It's really cool to do. And back to the people point, many people say that, of course, the human being is the weakest chain of the weakest piece of that chain. I think the human can be your strongest weapon.
Yeah.
By having people, and I'm not saying that I should be completely distrusting everything, but by just doing the simple checks and balances, like you were saying, checking the emails, a phishing mail, checking if someone is walking into your building, all the different things there, right? Yeah. You need to be aware that things can go sour, right? Yeah. I think in that sense, also, and doing that also in a kind of a fun way, right? People don't do naming and shaming, but basically use a lot of humor to actually start educating people.
Yeah.
It's also part of education of the people, right? And making sure that the user also understands why security, for example, is enforced. Yeah. Right. A great example that we have with a customer in Belgium in this case is that they rolled out our browser solution. Yeah. And they used to have a bring your own device policy, meaning that, they would actually say to third-party contractors like, here you have a laptop from our team, our IT team, that gives you access to our corporate network. And it was a pain, of course, because they have so many locations worldwide. They need to have these devices ready. They need to have, access to the network. They need an IT person there to help that third-party contractor and so on and so forth. And we showed them that there is a different way, saying, hey, here's a browser. You can access it with any device that you have. We will allow certain things, but we also block certain things according to our security policies. And that's a great way of doing it, because in this case, the third-party contractor just needs to download the browser and can move forward. However, you also need to inform him, of course, about what he can and cannot do.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think in education and then also in adoption of security, it's very important that we also inform the end user around what our policy is as a company with regards to certain things like that.
Yeah.
And then you have a much higher adoption, but you also have a higher awareness from the user. It's like, why are we actually blocking this?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it makes sense actually, because I wouldn't do that on my private laptop either, right? But I think it starts also with educating our users around, hey, this is why we're doing it. These are the benefits for the company in doing so. This is how you keep the company safe. And I think that part in really educating and also informing people is something any CISO or any CISO team or CIO team can do already. And that's a thing that a call to action that I would really try to enforce, because then the business also here then really understands why we're doing this.
I like that approach. I really do, because it's when we start nudging people a bit more, and again, going from security being a distinct function in the back of the IT room or somewhere else in the organization, we're moving more and more into the business. Yeah. And by, slowly maturing the culture in the organization towards a more security informed culture as well.
Exactly.
Exactly to your point.
One thing to add on the people side, right? Please introduce straight away a 0800 number.
Yeah.
For every end user. Basic saying, if something is going wrong, the culture should be saying, I'm going to call that number straight away.
Yeah.
Instead of, I'm going to hide because I did something really stupid, or I clicked on a PDF which I shouldn't have done, or I did send out some data which is now breaching the GDPR and that kind of things. Of course, you should have a culture that people are speaking up.
Yeah.
And so that's what I meant with not naming and shaming, but basically create that culture that people say, oh, everyone makes mistakes. Right? Even I make mistakes, right?
Yeah, I like that, because it ties back to the reactive to proactive as well, right? Yeah. Reactive is letting them know that, if this happens, this is really bad, don't click phishing emails, la, la, la. But being proactive is actually allowing them to fail safely. We know that people will eventually fail. Even today, what has happened over the past 3 years from a cyber criminal focus in a technology use is we have the zero-click vulnerabilities as well. So you can actually receive a phishing email that is not phishing against you as an individual, but phishing against the solutions that you have in place. Now that changes the game entirely. And imagine if you start blaming your employees about the technology you implemented to help them do their work. That's not going to work. So be nice, let people fail safely, support them, and then move on. We've had great conversations already, focusing on, the different trends in the industry, moving towards more around the impact for the different organizations and the businesses out there. Some of the outcomes to look for as well, and some general guidance around, what should be some of the focus points, both from an organizational perspective, an initiative perspective, an investment perspective. But I really want to dive a bit further in towards what do we advise, the board of directors for when we move into that whole cyber risk picture. What are the things that we should talk to them about today that they weren't thinking about 3 years ago, maybe?
This is the most fascinating topic, right? And I love the whole topic. Now, I have a background in the Big Four, right? Yeah. So I was for 20 years a partner in one of the Big Fours, and I educated more than probably something like 50 to 100 board members, right?
Yeah.
To actually see, okay, what is it about cyber risk?
Yeah.
Because what you would not like to have is that your board is reacting like, I'm living on the countryside, right? Mm-hmm. And at evening, you're driving there and you don't have lights, and suddenly you see a bunny, a rabbit on the street.
Yeah.
And you're coming with your headlights, and then the question is, what is that rabbit doing?
Yeah.
Nothing. He's afraid.
Yeah.
And just stays there.
Yeah.
So I think the thing that we should be doing, and that we are doing luckily, is that we basically educate or make the board aware how to deal with cyber risk.
So they don't become the rabbits?
They don't. There is no board. Boards, they hate if they don't have any room to maneuver.
Yeah.
You need to ensure that they have a framework in which they can make decisions. And they should be having multiple options. Without options, they don't take any decision. Yeah. Doing business is taking risk. And that then links back saying, okay, what is your risk appetite, right? And that sounds very academically, but really that's just back saying, okay, where do I have my biggest impact? What is my legal framework saying? Hey, do I have a view on my state of affairs around cybersecurity? So how vulnerable is my organization? Right? What about then resilience? How fast can I get back into business? Right?
Yeah.
And that's where you should be playing with around with these kind of themes to educate your board, but also to decide on saying, okay, where do we need to improve? And that links into, of course, the strategic initiatives, because, of course, every time you need also to take that angle as well. A big change in the organization means that there can be a merger acquisition, but there can also be saying, hey, we're going to change that business and process and that kind of things. Again, ask the same questions. Okay, does something change in my risk appetite? And where do I need to improve? So I'm not agreeing with many people in the industry saying, hey, we need to educate board members and that kind of things. They know that this is a very important topic. But what we're doing together with Palo Alto is basically saying, okay, that's nice. You know that you need to do something. Let me show you now what we think that you should be doing based on that risk appetite.
Yeah.
And make that actionable. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
People are a little bit tired on theories, concept, PowerPoints.
Yeah.
Let's now make it actionable.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe it's not as much about educating the board from at least the risk side. Maybe it's about educating the security teams as well, in order for them to actually move in front of the board and be able to. And like we were talking about earlier as well, and Michiel, I know you have a point on that as well. One of the hidden gems in one of our security platforms, so one of the products is the data visualization piece. So saying that, here's a business initiative, we want to do something around this in the innovation team or in the development team. It could be AI, it could be something else. And we can clearly show them that, well, we don't have data from that area. That means we have a visibility gap. So let's just make sure that your risk thresholds or your risk appetite, your risk tolerance is matching that. Clearly, we have no visibility in there. So if you move into that area, for us, from a cybersecurity, cyber risk perspective, that would be a significant increase in your risk appetite. So maybe that's part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
I would definitely agree, Jesper. But I think there's one element, though, that's more overarching. And I think that you can be very secure but not compliant, and the other way around.
Yes.
Right? And then you have also privacy.
Yeah.
Right? Which is a different topic at all. Then you have sovereignty, and you have the whole geopolitics that is coming along. So there are so many elements that a board now needs to take into account that, to go back to risk, in order to determine the risk, you need to have a strategy on those elements.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And a strategy can also be like, okay, for example, take sovereignty. That's not relevant for us in this shape or form, or we only apply it here and there. That can be fine. But we also know organizations that, for example, were very dependent on Russia. Whether they like it or not, they were bound to shut that business down. And that also has a quite severe business impact. So I think those elements for the board are very important to have a view on before you go further down into risk management and to have a strategy around that, because that's a big element now that has changed probably compared to the previous years. And the other elements that are now coming along is, of course, what happens from, we didn't talk about the elephant in the room, that we are both US companies. And in Europe, people have a view on that. So that's also important there, to be transparent and to have that conversation. That's where privacy comes along. That's where sovereignty comes along. That's where we both have a good story. And that's what we also, I would say, would recommend to the boards, is to have that conversation transparently and openly.
Yeah, actually, that sounds very much like what I would call a value multiplier of having the partnership between IBM and Palo Alto Networks if you have an organization that are asking these questions, and then I used to have this phrase just in the beginning around, the geopolitical situation and sort of the instability and insecurity that came along with it. I used to say that please don't let your geopolitical emotions cloud your better judgments, right? But let's go into that conversation and with the boards as well.
Yeah.
With the executive teams, even with the security teams as well, because eventually they're going to present, whatever recommendations they have to the business as well. So let's be open, let's be transparent around how we look at certain things. And as you said, there's already great conversations going on. So around that future topic, what's in hold for businesses? What's in the future? How does it look?
Well, it's very dynamic, to say the least, right? Yeah. Like the points we discussed around sovereignty, privacy, everything that's going on there. AI, of course, is changing a lot of those dynamics. Like we have all these kind of conversations. I can also understand that people getting maybe sometimes fatigued with all the AI conversations. We need to make it tangible. I think there's a lot of trends and developments going on, like we discussed earlier on. I think we need to make it real for the companies to really show the business outcomes and what it can deliver. Right. For the companies. And I think from a security, the future standpoint, I think that to John's point, we still have a lot of catching up to do.
Yes.
Unfortunately. That's what I see happening in conversation with customers, right? I see now more and more companies, for example, embracing the zero trust model. I think that you and I, Jesper, have been preaching that for many years already, right? Yeah. Now we see it actually is happening. Yeah. And people are embracing it. Yeah. But it takes time. Right? It's about people, it's about technology, it's about processes. These things take time. And people are, what I see is that a lot of companies have too little people, too many priorities, a lot of tasks, a lot of manual tasks. And I think there's a lot to gain in order to really go to a more automated way of working still. Yeah. I think that's the real start. Because then you can, when you have automated the majority of your work, you can then focus on your more strategic initiatives. But I think in the conversations that we're having with our customers or prospects, there's still a lot of catching up to do. So it's a bit of chicken and egg discussion sometimes where you keep running with the status quo. Yeah. But by doing that, you don't get the innovation piece, right? You're just running the status quo. And I think that's where the discussion comes in. And that's where also partners like IBM comes in, that we can help do it for them in order to make that change towards a more future-proof architecture.
So focusing around the utilization of the already existing investment or potentially new investment, not just, how much are you using it, but what are you using it for and in which way are you using it as well? Because one of the worst examples we had years ago with the traditional firewalls was bringing a next generation firewall, but still use IP addresses and port. That's very technical, right? Yeah. But just using it as a replacement box didn't really give you any value. You had to utilize some of the new functionalities in there. And same goes for new technologies in general. When you bring it in, how do you utilize it? How well do you utilize it? Who utilizes it, maybe even to that point. But John, what do you think future outlook then?
Interesting. I was thinking, if you would have asked me that 20 years ago,
you would have said, well, 20 years from now, I'll sit at a table, I'll discuss this.
The interesting thing is, 8 years ago, I was part of someone writing a book around Vision 2025. And he was 8 years ago, he said, okay, can you write a chapter on security? And all the things that I thought would happen in 2025 happened 2 years later, so in 2020. So as one learning, everything that we are currently envisioning is probably happening 3 times faster than we think.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's scary. That's really scary. Yeah. And that's also, then on one side, it's really sometimes cool. Then from a technology point of view, and it's really cool. But also for a person, it can be very scary because it's going so damn fast. Yeah. It's going so fast. Then, of course, and you only can counter that is basically fixing that basis in an automated way. Yeah. I think that's the whole thing, right? You need to know what your network is. You need to know the end-to-end process from vulnerability management, where from a discovery to auto-remediation and that kind of. That should be no-brainers. All these standard security processes, which are linked to the IT operating processes, should be almost 90 to 95% unautomated, because then you are agile enough to actually start looking into things that really then do matter. There's something that we didn't touch here, supply chain security.
Yeah.
And not meaning SAP security, but basically managing the whole security then across a supply chain. And there where DORA is fitting in and that kind of things, right?
Yeah.
When we moved into COVID, it proved that basically we were quite vulnerable in our supply chain from many angles, right?
Yeah.
From many angles.
Yeah.
And of course, the most incidents happen probably not at our own organization, but probably through one of our business partners than somewhere.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think I don't think that we have an answer there yet. And let's be very positive, right? Normally, I think it would take 5 to 10 years to get an answer. So probably we have it in 2 years.
Yeah.
But we really need to have something, and that's not only on the technology side. That's also about vouching of organizations. A little bit. I'm not getting in that ESG thing, but it's really also about, okay, let's all link to that one.
Yeah.
How integrated, how secure by design is an organization that you are that you are dealing with, right? How is that integrated? I think that's a huge topic. A call out to everyone in the industry, but also in the boards and that kind of things. If we keep on thinking that security is only a cost item, we will keep on having new legislations and regulations pushing us into a direction. And to be very honest, I hope, that's the other hope I have, that of course that people think, hey, that whole thinking about security should be embedded. We learned the hard way the last 10, 15 years, that how the organization, the world did change. I think let's not wait on a regulator pushing us to actually implement certain controls and that kind of things to keep us secure. That's the responsibility of every board member, of every exec, of every damn person, right?
So doing the right things.
Absolutely.
And that includes security. So maybe that's part of the future outlook is change management. Not change as in the ITIL processes and all of that, but change management. You start looking a bit at your supply chain, you hopefully already are, but you also look at the kill chain because that's part of the security game. And then you look a bit at the value chain. So the value chain for the business, right? Now you have change management, 3 chains. All right. Any closing comments that you feel like this is?
Probably. I think let's agree on one thing in the industry. Let's stop using FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Yeah.
Let's stop using that. I see too many times, even also at our firm, then sometimes people have a presentation and start with a slide about incidents and fines and that kind of things. Let's really appeal on the accountability that every organization, every person in the organization should be having. This should be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Let's move away from fear, uncertainty, and doubt to actually say, okay, let's now make it actionable. Let's now make it tangible. Let's now make it real with something that is working and not concept, but really is working, which is proving the right value for an organization, which is supporting innovation, which is supporting people, which is supporting basically our civilization, right?
Yeah.
That's, I think, my final comment. Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, my closing remark would be, in the security space, we have more than 4,500 companies. I think when you add all the AI-driven companies, probably the same amount. It's a lot to digest for customers.
Yes.
It's a lot. And everybody's trying to solve a small piece of the puzzle, and the solution is always to buy X, Y, Z, right? And of course, I'm biased working for Palo Alto Networks, so I won't go into a pitch here, but I think where we need to help our customers is to make sure that they have a very clear view around where you make an investment.
Yeah.
And that it is backed up by the overall strategy. And that can be any vendor, right? It's completely up to the customer. But I think we as a security industry have the, I would say, well, how should I put it? Not too strong here, but I think we have a duty to make sure that the investments that a company made actually contributes to the goal that they want to achieve.
Yeah.
And I think when we're doing that, to your point about fear, uncertainty, and doubt, when we make sure that every dollar that's invested in security is well spent and delivers the outcomes that the company is looking for, then we all have in the security industry a good business model. I read too much about IT projects failing.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate for all of us in the IT industry, because you want a project, and I'm totally convinced that everybody wakes up in the morning that they want to do a good project rather than a bad project, right?
Yeah.
So everybody's trying, but unfortunately we see quite some projects failing, and some of them come in the news, and then the impact is of course quite severe. So I think we have a responsibility as a security industry as a whole to make sure that what we are selling here, that it gets deployed well, and that it is adopted by the whole organization, and it delivers the outcomes that were projected at the beginning. And I think when we do that, then I feel that with Palo Alto Networks and IBM, the story that we have, that we can show to the board, to the company itself, that we will deliver those outcomes. But I totally welcome, and I say this all the time, is that please explore other options as well. Yeah. Do your due diligence, look at other solutions. But make sure that when you make that decision, that's a well-informed decision, that you have validated that decision, that you did a proof of concept, a proof of value, what have you. But make that decision very consciously, because I feel responsible for the fact that the security budgets are not going up. The IT budget as a whole does not go up. It needs to be in line with where the company is heading towards. So we have, as an industry, a responsibility to make sure that that investment is well used. Yeah. And I think that's what I'm trying to do every single day within my organization. I'm sure that John is doing the same within his organization. Yep. And I think then we can really help our customers, because now more than ever, the noise is everywhere.
And that's, I guess, where the true value of partnership and collaboration comes in. We can assist in looking at that whole challenge that they're trying to solve. Yeah. And we can provide at least our perspective on how would you go about doing this, and how do we secure the outcomes, as you were saying.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Jesper.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.